Hey folks, very good morning. I'm Kathan, one of the co-founders of BugBase, and today we have with us Bipin and Siddharth, who will be talking about threat modeling for contextual pen testing. Bipin here works at Stripe as a product security engineer and has previously worked at companies like Oracle. Interestingly enough, he's also a strategic investor by himself. He loves to invest, and he right now is in the US, and he has given some of his time uh, to share his knowledge about threat modeling. And Siddharth here is a security engineer who works at BugBase, builds internal tool for us, and probably has done a lot of threat modeling by himself internally for BugBase and a lot of our clients, right? So over to you, folks. Thank you, Bipin. Thank you, Siddharth, for coming in. And yeah, folks, we are recording the particular uh, webinar, but would be interest if you are interested in like Q&A, ask if you want to ask them any questions. Feel free to stay here, and it should go about for next 30-40 minutes.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kazan. It's good to be here. My name is Bipin again. So yeah, I want this to be more interactive. So just feel free to unmute or ask questions, or put your questions in the chat. The more interactive it is, the more fun it will be to like go through this. And I don't want just me to speak and just be a monotonous presentation. Cool. So how many of you have heard about threat modeling? Do you have a show of hands? There's a raise hand and Zoom.
Yeah, probably they
Okay.
can. I can let me unmute Keyur first. He wants to speak about something. Yeah.
Yeah, I only see one hand up.
Keyur, if you can unmute, yeah. Keyur,
Yeah,
yeah.
just like click on the show of hands that how many of you heard about threat modeling before. It will be good to get an idea of how many people already know about it versus how many people are just completely brand new to this concept.
There's a lot of folks.
Yeah,
Keyur,
seems like it.
you are unmute, but I'm not sure why he's not
I
able
think you
to.
don't need to unmute for that. So you just click on that.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have quite a few folks who do not know about threat modeling. So you can keep it a little more basic introduction to threat modeling. Okay, so what are we looking at, like the tangible outcomes from this? I want you to get like three things out of this. First is a high-level overview of what is threat modeling, what is threat modeling process, how do you incorporate threat modeling into your pen testing or bug bounty, and how do you focus on application context when doing pen testing. Yeah, Rahul. So this is like assessing infrastructure for threats. Yeah. So let's raise what is threat modeling. The foremost question, like why are we doing this, and what is threat modeling in general? Um, so what is threat modeling is a structured approach to identify and mitigate potential security issues or vulnerabilities in a system or an application. Um, why we do that? We do threat modeling to minimize the security risk and potential impact to your systems, applications, software services, anything you're trying to do threat modeling for. And why do we do that? Like, I guess sorry, not why. How do we do that? Do we do that by asking one very simple question: is what could go wrong, and how do we prevent that? So it's two simple questions: what could go wrong, and how do we prevent that? And threat modeling is like in a basic concept, like in everyday life, we kind of doing threat modeling in our life every day. For example, if you're driving, you are constantly taking decision and assessing how to drive, like where to stop, where to take turns, where like the stop signs, right signal, whatnot. So we are already looking at in our head. We kind of doing threat modeling pretty much for every time, all the time, and constantly taking decision, assessing risk, and trying to see how do we prevent ourselves or the situation or the people around us. Um, we're gonna do like a small exercise of threat modeling of a house. So this will give a good overview of like if you're threat modeling a application, let's take a very ordinary example of everybody who is joined this meeting. I'm sure you have a roof on your head and you're living in an apartment or a house. So you're just gonna do like incorporate the threat modeling concept to do a threat modeling of a house. So why do everybody lives in a house? We live there because to prevent ourselves from external threats or external like wind, earthquake, whatnot. Like you want to be safe, right? That's why you live in a house. And what are the different things in a house that kind of prevents you? You have doors, you have windows, you have different entry points, you have locks on your doors, you might have a CCTV camera system, you might have a alarm system, you might have a person looking at you after your house 24/7. So those are all the countermeasures that you have that kind of prevents you for somebody, an external intruder, to get into your house and trying to like um, uh, get access to the assets you have. So one part of this is threat modeling is identifying the assets for a house. Can you like, can guys give us like what are different assets that you're trying to protect in a house? What are some examples of assets? Yeah, so wealth. Yeah, your PS5s, your TV
Definitely.
gaming systems. Those are good examples. Okay, yeah. So all your valuables, your living and non-living objects, your friends, your family, all are the examples of good examples of assets, right? So your house is considered a house like an application, and different assets within a house are the things you're trying to prevent. And then what are the countermeasures? Like what are the like mitigation in place in a house? I already told a few things about I already covered a few things, but what are the other mitigations that a house has to prevent an intruder? Okay, doors, windows, surveillance system, that's good. Locks. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so you have some mitigation in place that kind of prevents your house from intruder. And what are the threats to a house? What are the threats we're trying to prevent here? Okay, fire, theft, thieves, loot, bomb, yeah. So several extreme examples, like you said, like somebody bombing your house. You probably don't have a countermeasure for that, right? That's kind of a DDoS kind of a situation, you can say. Natural disasters, right? You could have some protection in place for natural disaster, but you can't really prevent 100%. So in that case, you can only minimize the risk. You can't eliminate the risk. Great. Yeah. So those are like some examples. And so let's talk about the risk. Risk is actually the likelihood of a threat being a vulnerability being exploited or a threat being real. So out of all these things we have listed here, theft, thieves, loot, bombing, natural disaster, what are the likelihood of, let's say, natural disaster? It's a very low likelihood of that. It probably once in a few years, few tens of thousands of years. Okay, somebody posted a direct message. So yeah, so we look at the all the risk and identify which risk are more likely versus which are less likely risk, and we kind of prioritize those risks based on how likely somebody is able to exploit those risks, and then we try to prevent kind of countermeasures towards that. And there's another thing called threat actors. So for a house, who are the threat actors here? Threat actors are people or entity who are trying to harm you or trying to exploit a threat or vulnerability. So for a house, who will be threat actors? Okay, you already covered. Yeah, okay. Thieves, friends, robbers, they're the same thing. Yeah, so it could be, it could be animals, can rodent who are your malicious neighbors. Okay, so those are like examples of threat actors, right? And yeah, delivery persons, yeah, delivery or any kind of person where if you have a door unlocked, then that's a vulnerability. That's if you have a door, but if a door is unlocked, then that mitigation is not effective because you have a vulnerability in the system and somebody can a threat actor can come and exploit that vulnerability. Cool. So that's a good exercise.
Bipin, do you
Yeah,
think
that's
that you would also want to
Mhm.
include the internal threats while covering the threat actors at this point?
Yeah. So internal threats could be, yeah, you're like your mates, right? So they're your housemates who you have given access to, but they could turn against you and could steal from you. So those are examples of good internal threats.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. So let's move forward to the next one, where importance of threat modeling in contextual pen testing. So now we have looked at like what is a threat model and like why do we do that, and let's gain all the knowledge we did from the exercise to a real world example of like threat modeling software application or a cloud service or anything that you are trying to test for a bug bounty. Um, so for example, let's say you're trying to yeah, so contextual pen test, let's take a step back and learn about like what is contextual pen testing. What is important to understand the context of the application or the software that you're trying to test. You really need to understand what is the business logic there, what are they trying to provide, what are the services they're trying to offer, what are the assets that they are trying to prevent, and what are the potential threats. If you understand that, you have a better understanding of where to focus your time and where to like narrow down your scope of your pen testing. Um, for that, you can read docs. There's pretty much every services out there have really good documentation. There's API docs, there's customer doc, there's help docs. There is, you can also watch YouTube videos, learn more about the business logic. Sometimes it's really difficult to understand some complex enterprise applications, but it's always good idea to at least understand what are they trying to serve, who are their customers. The biggest things are your data they're trying to prevent. Every application or every service out there has some kind of a customer data that they're collecting, and the data is sometimes the most primary asset. Other things are, so you need to identify what are the different assets and understand the context really well in order to find high quality issues and focus your efforts on things that are important and things where you could make a bigger impact. Anybody have any question at this point? Siddharth, you want to add anything?
Yeah, Bipin. So, when we are talking about contextual pen testing, are you referring to like somebody doing reconnaissance and all those usual pen testing activities, but translating that to a threat model? Like, I think we all do this threat modeling of the
Yeah.
infrastructure that we're targeting in our minds. So, like, I think you're referring to putting that out on a let's say a data flow diagram, right?
Yeah, so you can also, yeah, a data flow diagram would be a more sophisticated way of doing it. But if you're just doing pen testing for bug bounty, you can make a note of different, like this is the application you're trying to test. These are different assets there are, and this is what could go wrong. And trying to ask those questions, like what could go wrong and what this business is trying to prevent, and get more context on that. If you don't have enough context, go read docs and read things that could give you those enough context. And data flow diagram is one example where if you want to go take a step further, you can create like a small data flow diagram where how different things are connected to each other. If you're logging into the application, you assume that this data is going to a different server, different APIs calls happening. You can make a kind of a small DFT to even like further narrow down your efforts for pen testing. Yeah, you can do. There's a Google Visio is there. There is a Whimsical. Miro is also good for doing threat modeling, diagrams, DFT diagrams. Yeah, there's a bunch of tools you can just look it up.
I
And you can
used
offer, yeah.
Arius Risk, I think, and O was Threat Dragon when I was doing threat modeling.
Mhm.
So yeah, they're pretty good as well.
Yeah, I've used Miro and I've used Whimsical. So yeah,
Whimsical is nice as well. Yeah.
yeah, just taking like a simple note of things that you want to focus on that would really help you, and spending less time but focusing on high quality issues and really like high vulnerabilities, high impact vulnerabilities. Cool. So let's look at some examples of, let's say you are doing a threat modeling. You're doing pen testing of a social media website or social network, and now you know ask like what could go wrong. And so let's do a little bit of threat modeling of, let's say, social media websites, say Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. What are the assets are there? What are the assets for a social network? APIs, yeah. Cloud infra, the infrastructure that they run on, servers, DBs, on-prem infra. Okay. Those are good examples of assets. What else? Yeah, so you're talking about all the system. Yeah. So employees, employee data, employees are assets. What else? So what when you're accessing when accessing a social network, you're providing some data to the company, right? The application is running on, it's an asset. Yes. What is the most important thing for them? What is the like highest, if they have to prioritize all the assets? Yeah, so PI data is definitely, exactly. So these are customer data. That's hitting the nail there. For a social network, customer data is probably their top priority. But if you do a threat modeling and then, okay, this customer data is, where do the data get stored, and how do the data get traversed to the system, different from your browser all the way to the server? What are different things involved in that? So I'm trying to like keep up with the questions. Is that a question, Mob? How could threat modeling in contextual penetration testing, Aadhaar hacked recently, was it a bad threat modeling, or it could have been done better? I think, yeah, I don't have much context on like what I know little bunch of data got breached and leaked, and they probably did not have enough countermeasures to protect the data, and as a result, it was like somehow got leaked. But again, that you can always minimize the risk. There will always be ways where somebody can get the data. If somebody have internal access to the data, then there could be internal insider threats as well. Another question is, which type of high severity vulnerability we found in threat modeling? So high severity vulnerability, so we're trying to identify threats. So there is a difference between a threat and a vulnerability. A threat is for, let's say, customer data getting compromised is a threat. How do you get the customer data? You exploit a vulnerability. You maybe get access to a database or do a SQL injection and get access to database. That's a vulnerability. But a threat is another high level category where it's like broken authentication, uh, somebody misusing authentication and getting access to uh, unprivileged access to something, that would be a threat, right? Or losing customer data is a threat. So we can't really like say severity depends on the likelihood of that threat being occurring. So another question is, threat modeling is a proper team exercise. It's not really a proper team exercise. It's kind of you can do threat modeling. So you can ask this question: when do you do threat modeling? You can do threat modeling at any stages of your software development lifecycle. It could be threat modeling of your entire system, end-to-end threat model, or it could be a point in time where you are looking at small changes in the system and doing a threat modeling on that. It's mostly involved during the early stages of your design cycle, when you are designing the APIs or designing the system, and you're doing like on a system design level, where that's where you start doing threat modeling and try to build security controls into the system. So it's something called secure by default. The aim of threat modeling is to have secure by default follow secure by default practices. Okay, another question is, how can one persuade customer in regards to an existing threat that one may have reported without any POC? Yeah, so if you can exploit. So again, we're talking about threat versus vulnerability. So if you can somehow demonstrate that this is the impact of the threat, then that's where reasoning for developing a POC around that. So we'll go in that. So let's take a little pause on the questions and move forward with so we are on the e-commerce website, right? So yeah, we talk about customer data on social network site is one of their primary assets. And let's say if you're doing pen testing, or if you're doing bug bounty for Facebook, what are the primary things you are trying to find? Like OS top 10 is obviously one thing, but where would you first go and try to like find vulnerabilities? Anyone want to take that question? Client side vulnerability, okay. Business logic flaw. So that's a good point. So you map the attack surface, you figure out, okay, do all the asset discovery, where the customer data is, what is the data? It's the PI data, you have media files, you have photos, you have different permission model that you're trying to break into. Okay. So what a social network is trying to do? How do they make money? How do they make money from how does the social network make money? Through ads, right? So how many people are trying to, have you ever tried like go onto the ads platform and try to do pen testing on the ad sites instead of focusing on the profile itself, or like your Facebook profile or your Instagram profile, versus going onto the ad platform and try to test that, because that's where the majority of assets are. And if something goes wrong there, if you find a vulnerability there, that is more high impact versus finding a vulnerability on a profile user side. Okay, there's another question. During software development lifecycle, threat modeling changes how we finalize threat model or figure out final commit point. I don't understand this question. What do you, so that cycling.
Well, probably if you want to unmute, I can do that and probably get you on the call. If Bipin, you didn't understand the question, right?
Yeah, I didn't understand the question of are you trying to say like final pushing the code, or so that you want to answer that maybe?
Even I don't understand what he's trying to ask.
Yeah, you can unmute and
Yeah,
you can-
Akbar, I've unmuted him, so he can probably speak if he wants. He is unmute right now.
Yeah, final output of threat modeling is a list of threat. It's not a list of vulnerabilities, it's a list of threats. And you identify threats based on the different the assets that you identify, and then asking different questions at what could go wrong at each stage, at each point, each if you draw like a full DFT diagram, then you kind of zoom into details of each module and figure out what could go wrong and list those threats. And then you ask question whether you have a countermeasure in place for that for that threat or not. And if answer is no, then that could be an issue, and you basically that's the threat, that's a valid threat. And then yeah, cool. How can we make threat modeling on REST APIs? So threat modeling around REST API. So what first thing you need to ask, like what this REST API is doing and how somebody can abuse this. You might have some like session tokens there, kind of some identifiers or some kind of API tokens within that APIs. How are those protected? How are those tokens scoped as well? Is it rate limiting? Is it could be another a threat where somebody can like fuzz those API calls. So you basically ask like what different questions around that. There is a checklist. It's not a checklist. It's a methodology called Stride. I can paste a link here. Yes, so Stride is basically different categories where each thread can be classified into each of these categories. So if looking at your REST API example, like how can somebody spoof the API? How can someone like tamper the API? How can someone do a repudiation or kind of denial of service, or like I talked about like privilege escalation, where if you can play with the token, API tokens or something. There might be another question is there might be a chance where one thread might be dependent on another and so on. So you have any any such problem where it's a deadlock. There are dependencies, but then again, you've identified like, how do we minimize the risk here? Is there something you can do, like find a middle ground where at least fix one issue or like partially fix something? Okay, let's look at another example of like e-commerce website. So we looked at social network, where was the first example. Second is like say for online shopping, what are the different assets for online shopping platform? You have your usual suspects like customer data is there. Now you have more PI data, you have shipping address, you have billing address, you have credit card info. Yeah, your inventory data. So there are two types of inventory data. One is like more private data and one is more public data. So inventory of a seller, you might be able to see everything of that seller if it's publicly available. How do you in a category of assets, where do you define that? Where do you prioritize those inventory inventory of the items for an online shopping website? Okay, should I go to the questions, or should I continue with a couple of slides we have? What do you suggest? We have a couple of
I
questions.
think we can go through the slides, and you can refer to all the questions in the
Okay,
last section. Yeah.
cool. Yeah, so for e-commerce website, we have different inventory data, shipping data, credit card data. Those are like primary assets they're trying to prevent, especially if you're doing pen testing or doing bug bounty. You need to understand where could you make a maximum impact and maximum dent. So let's say if you identify, so how do you use that knowledge to actually like chain vulnerabilities, different vulnerabilities together to make a high impact vulnerability. So let's say you found an accesses, and if you just do a like alert one and submit that report, that would be a good report, obviously, but that wouldn't be like a real high impact. But if you try to dig more deeper into the application and see that maybe you can change the shipping address and with the accesses, and then have somebody ship something to your address, right? That would be a different vulnerability, although it's like using accesses, but you have used the context of the application to use the accesses to change the shipping address, which turn it to a high impact issue. And that's how you would think one step ahead. Similarly, if you can, let's say if you find accesses, can you get the CSRF token, or can you somehow chain different vulnerabilities together to maybe go after the credit card information, or somehow like try to buy something from by someone else's credit card. So think of like all the threats that you come up with, where how can you use the existing vulnerabilities that you found and try to do a potential impact, like a high impact vulnerability. Can you do something around that? So yeah, so that's all I have. It's pretty brief, so we can go into the questions. I think there are more questions than the content.
Bipin, so there's this one question that I am very curious about. So I'd like you to answer that first. So Tuheen has asked that how do you threat model large organizations? So let's say we're taking Facebook, for example. They've
Mhm.
got so many applications, like even Messenger is their application, and like
Yeah.
on a larger side, like Meta has so many assets. So how do you incorporate everything? Like do you go application wise, like this is the threat model for this application, this is the threat model for this application,
Yeah.
or like do you go organization wise?
You go like small, you do small thread models, like a bunch of small thread models for each module or each application or each feature, and then you try to like chain them together and do like an end-to-end threat model. So you can combine different threat models to keep an inventory of like a large end-to-end threat model, but that starts with like for example Messenger or profile or your upload function or different features that you have. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
small thing, but yeah, in a long run, you kind of maintain that inventory and then come up with like an end-to-end threat model and try to connect the different dots.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Okay, so where were we in the questions? What was the last question we tackled? Okay, so threat modeling large organization. What are the prerequisite knowledge about tech infrastructure library plugin example to create threat modeling? Um, Prerequisite knowledge, it depends. I don't have like a fixed answer here. It depends on you can learn as you go. So it could be as easy as like what could go wrong on like a super high level. So threat modeling is you can keep it super high level, but at the same time you kind of start zooming in. And once you zoom in, then you need all those like specific infrastructure knowledge or like servers, libraries, or plugin knowledge, the underlying tech knowledge. So you can start with on a high level and then start zooming into different different functions, I would say. Can we do a threat modeling exercise? We can, but we don't have enough time for that. Are there any specific website that we can practice threat modeling to learn more about it? Yeah, you can. I think OS has something. And even Microsoft has like good threat modeling sources. Common threat model frameworks I've tried. There's Dread model as well. It's more data. It's more threat classification framework. Stride and Dread. There's also can counter. Threat modeling is done at different stages. So usually start at early stage where you haven't started writing the code. You only know that this is the feature you want to build, and you have this architecture diagram. And based on the architecture diagram, you do threat modeling. And once you identify that these are different threats, you kind of build those countermeasures or those remediation into the architecture diagram, and then start the development work. So it's often like a shift left uh, uh, towards like at the extreme left and end of it. Is it possible to make threat model for APIs by writing test unit like to application? So I don't understand this question. Is it possible to make threat models for APIs by writing test unit like we do for application, but in case of from point of security? Are you saying you're like trying to automate threat model? Is that? Yes, threat model is mostly you do internally. So you probably won't find like any public website where you can like threat modeling of anything. You just you it's for your internal consumption. All right. Yes, you can there are different tools out there. There's a threat modeler. You can use Defect Dojo for like doing like just for the artifacts, or you can just use like a spreadsheet as well. It also was chatting Dragon project. So this has a good list. Okay. Advice for penetration testers for good and ethical pen testing. Your opinion on the good offense is the best defense. Yeah, with the threat modeling approach, or the process of threat modeling is you're trying to do secure by default and trying to build security into the product in early stages and not trying to retrofit afterwards. And that's where it's like offense, you're trying to like build security in. Do you have my own personal threat model? I have different threat models for different applications. But yeah. All right. I think we are at time.
Perfect. I guess, yeah, exactly
Yeah.
at time, right? And it went for good 30-40 minutes, and people loved it. We had a peak of 60 participants at a point, and uh, we saw a lot of interaction from participants also coming in. So thank you, Bipin. Thank you,
Sure.
Siddharth, for giving us your time. Maybe there's a last question if Siddharth, you want to take it ahead, and then probably we'll close up the session, and we will share the recording of webinar with all the participants, and I'll also collate the links that Bipin have shared in the chat itself, right, so that people don't miss out on all the resources. And yeah, Siddharth, over to you if you want to answer that question.
Yeah, so Ajay, we handle threat modeling on a platform called Arius Risk. In fact, I'll drop the link to that. It's I think it's a pretty convenient tool. Arius Risk. And what it encompasses is you want to get an inventory of all the assets. So first, identifying all the assets is a big task when you've got cloud resources, on-prem assets, and all of that. So we first put all of that on a like a spreadsheet, and then one by one we try to connect those things together if possible, and like maintain trust boundaries, and create different um like diagrammatical representation of our application. And on a more like descriptive side, there like we do threat modeling outside our application. So a lot of like all of our infrastructure is involved in that threat model. On the application, like just the application side, we don't do a very in-depth threat model of the application, but we do count all the threats, like possible threats and all of that, while we consider, let's say, like if like wherever we are hosting our application, like I'm not at liberty to say, but wherever we are hosting our application, we do mention all the possible application level threats on that particular node, let's say.
Perfect. uh, Thank you, Siddharth, for answering that. And yeah, thank you, Siddharth. Thank you, Bipin, for tuning in. Thank you, everyone who joined in, and we'll share the link to the recorded webinar really soon.